Picture this, it's 2:37 a.m. You wake up in total darkness. At first it's quiet, almost too quiet. Then you hear it, breathing, heavy, uneven. But here's the thing, it's not yours. Your chest tightens, your throat goes dry, and every instinct in your body is screaming at you not to move. But you do. You sit up, and that's when you see it, silhouetted at the foot of your bed. Someone, just standing there. Now feel that chill crawling down your spine right now? That's the exact feeling people described in the true stories you're about to hear. Because tonight isn't about urban legends or made-up tales. These are 10 terrifying experiences that really happened to ordinary people, people like you. People who thought they were safe, until they weren't. Before we dive in, here's your warning. These aren't campfire ghost stories. They're darker, sharper, the kind of stories that make you check your doors twice, question every sound you hear, and replay them in your head long after the video ends. Some of them will make you think, that could never happen to me. Others will make you realize, it already could have. So, lock your doors, dim the lights, and get ready. Because once you hear these, you'll never feel completely safe again. Let's begin. It started with little things. Small, almost forgettable details. A mug that seemed to have moved from one side of the counter to the other. A sweater that she was sure she had folded neatly on her chair but now sat crumpled on the floor. Leftovers she swore she hadn't eaten were suddenly gone from the fridge. At first, she chalked it up to being scatterbrained, stressed, tired. Everyone forgets things, right? We tell ourselves little lies like that to keep the world predictable, manageable, because the alternative, that something's wrong, is far too unsettling to face. But this young woman, living alone for the first time in her life, couldn't quite shake the sense that something wasn't right. It is that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when the logic of your mind clashes with the instincts of your body. Her brain whispered, "You're fine. You're just tired." But her body screamed, "No, pay attention. Something's off." Days passed. The incidents continued. Food disappearing, objects shifting. And then, the sounds. At first, just faint rustling when she was home alone at night. Pipes, she thought. The house settling. Every excuse she could come up with sounded more reasonable than the possibility that someone else was in her apartment. Yet deep down, she knew. We all know. Humans evolved to notice when something feels wrong in our environment. That primal survival instinct never fully leaves us. One night after a long day at work, she was brushing her teeth. Her apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound echo a little too sharply. She turned off the bathroom light and walked into her bedroom, and that's when she froze. A sound so faint it could have been her imagination, a cough, low, muffled, coming from her closet. Her heart stopped. For a moment she stood completely still, toothbrush still in her hand, trying to convince herself it wasn't real. But then it came again, slightly louder. Someone was in there. She wanted to scream, but fear locked her throat shut. Adrenaline surged through her body, every nerve on fire. Her first instinct was to run. But if she moved suddenly, whoever or whatever was in her closet would know she knew. So, she did something that probably saved her life. She acted calm. She set her toothbrush down on the counter as if nothing had happened. She walked casually to the front door, and the second she stepped outside, she bolted. She called the police from her neighbor's apartment, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the buttons on her phone. When officers arrived, they went in first while she waited outside, pacing, her heart slamming against her ribs. Minutes passed. Then one of the officers emerged, face pale, eyes wide. He told her something she would never forget for as long as she lived. A man had been living in her closet. Not for a night. Not for a week. For weeks. He had made himself comfortable, hiding in the crawl space just above her closet, sneaking down whenever she left for work. He ate her food. He moved her things. He lived inches away from where she slept, where she changed clothes, where she thought she was safe. They found blankets, empty food wrappers, even a notebook filled with scribbled thoughts. He'd been watching her, studying her, learning her patterns. Now stop and think about that. Imagine the last time you were home alone, feeling safe in your bedroom. Imagine brushing your teeth, scrolling on your phone, falling asleep, all while a stranger crouched silently just a few feet away, waiting for you to drift off. That's the kind of terror that isn't supernatural. It isn't a ghost story. It's the kind that's real, and it's the kind you can never truly shake off once you've felt it. Psychologists talk about how our instincts are finely tuned survival tools. When we feel that nagging sense of dread for no reason, it is often because our subconscious is picking up on tiny cues we can to consciously explain. A faint smell, a shifted object, a sound too soft for most people to notice. This woman's brain kept trying to rationalize away her fears, but her instincts knew the truth. She wasn't alone. And here's the part that really chills you to the bone. Every single night she went to bed, she thought she was locking the world out by closing her front door. She thought she was safe. But the danger was already inside, watching, waiting. When she later reflected on the experience, she said she felt violated in a way words couldn't capture. It wasn't just about the break-in or the trespassing. It was about trust. Trust in her own perception, trust in her own home. That trust was shattered. And for months afterward, she found herself waking up at 3 a.m., convinced she heard something, terrified to open her closet again. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Don't let convenience or denial override the alarms going off in your body. Because those alarms exist for a reason. They're wired into us from thousands of years of evolution, honed to keep us alive. Think of how many times you've felt that sudden chill, that sense of being watched when no one's there. Most of the time, maybe it's nothing. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's everything. This story isn't meant to make you paranoid. It's meant to make you aware. The world is full of dangers that don't announce themselves with thunderclaps or flashing lights. Sometimes, danger hides quietly in the shadows, in closets, in basements, in the blind spots of your everyday life. And the people who survive are often the ones who listen to that tiny voice in the back of their head that says, "This isn't right." So the next time you notice a mug out of place or food missing, or a faint sound that shouldn't be there, don't brush it off. Don't tell yourself you're imagining things. Investigate, pay attention, because you never really know who or what might be standing just behind that closet door. And maybe tonight before you go to bed, you'll check your closet one more time, just in case. Back in the 90s, before smartphones, before caller ID was a common household thing, a teenager lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood that always felt safe. She was the kind of girl who left her blinds half open at night, the kind of girl who felt comfortable staying up late talking to friends on her landline phone, and sometimes even falling asleep with the TV humming in the background. Safety felt normal, until one night when the ringing phone jolted her awake. It was late, well past midnight, and that shrill, piercing ring in the darkness felt louder than it ever had before. Half asleep, she reached for the receiver, her voice groggy. "Hello?" she whispered. Nothing. Just silence. The line was open. She could hear the faint hum of static. She frowned, muttered something about wrong numbers and hung up. She tried to shake it off. Calls get misdialed all the time. But then, not 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time the silence seemed heavier, like someone was there, breathing just out of reach. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice sharper, but again, no answer. She slammed the phone down, her heart beating just a little too fast now. The next night it happened again. Same time, same silence. But this time, there was something else. Just as she was about to hang up, she heard it. A whisper. Faint, ragged, low. "I'm watching you." Her skin prickled instantly. The kind of chill that doesn't just sit on your arms but sinks all the way down into your stomach. She tried to laugh, tried to brush it off as some prankster from school. Teenage boys did stupid things like that. Still, she couldn't help but rush to her bedroom window, pulling her blinds shut with trembling hands. The calls kept coming, always late, always when the house was dark, when she was alone in her room, curled under her blanket. Sometimes it was silence, sometimes breathing, and sometimes the whisper again. "I'm watching you." The first few times she tried to shout back, to demand answers, but eventually she stopped, because whoever it was, they wanted her reaction, and she could feel that deep in her bones. So, she started letting the phone ring, refusing to pick up, but that made it worse, because the ringing itself became a weapon, piercing, relentless, impossible to ignore. She told her parents, of course. They brushed it off at first, a wrong number, a prank, but when they finally listened one night, when her father picked up and heard nothing but breathing on the other end, they realized it wasn't going to stop. They called the phone company, they called the police, and finally, after weeks of torment, the calls were traced. The family expected the number to come from miles away, maybe a payphone across town, maybe some kid in her class trying to scare her. But the truth was far worse. The calls weren't coming from another state or even another neighborhood. They were coming from the abandoned house directly across the street. That house she walked by every day. That house she could see from her bedroom window. Someone had been in there, in the dark, watching her draw her blinds, watching her walk into her room, watching her answer the phone in her pajamas, vulnerable, scared. Every whisper, every breath had come from just a stone's throw away. The moment she heard, her whole body went cold. She thought back to every time she'd stood in front of her window at night, blinds half open, phone pressed to her ear, the glow of the lamp outlining her against the glass. She imagined eyes staring from across the street, hidden behind cracked curtains and broken glass. She thought about the whisper, "I'm watching you," and realized it wasn't just a threat. It was the truth. The police searched the abandoned house. They found cigarette butts scattered on the floor near the window that faced her room. They found food wrappers. They found the phone line rigged up crudely to make those calls. Someone had been squatting in that empty house, setting up camp there. Someone who had chosen her, specifically. Not because she had done anything, not because she knew them, just because she was there, visible, accessible. And here's the part that makes your stomach knot. He wasn't just calling. He had been watching her routines, studying her. The phone calls were a game, a way to make her dance, to make her afraid, to feed off her fear. When you think about that, you realize the truth of why this story unsettles so deeply. It isn't the whisper itself. It's the fact that someone was that close, and she never knew. It's the realization that while she thought her home was a sanctuary, while she laughed it off as a prank, she was living inside his theater. He was the audience and she was the show. Imagine yourself in her position. You're 16, 17 years old. You're lying in bed. The hum of your old box fan filling the silence, the soft glow of your bedside lamp lighting the room. The phone rings, pulling you up, and when you answer, there's nothing. Then a voice. You're being watched. Your first instinct is to turn to the window to peer outside, and in that moment your body betrays you. You've shown him exactly what he wanted. The fear etched across your face, the way you clutch the curtain, the way your chest rises and falls too fast. He sees it all. He owns that moment. Psychologists say that one of the most primal fears humans have is the fear of being watched. It goes back to survival instincts, when being observed meant you were prey, when eyes in the dark could mean the difference between life and death. That's why your chest feels tight even hearing this story now. That's why you can feel your skin crawl. Why you might even be glancing at your own window, just to be sure. For that teenager, the fear never fully went away. Even after the police cleared the house, even after the calls stopped, she carried it with her. For months, she refused to sleep with her blinds open. For years, every time a phone rang unexpectedly in the night, her body tensed. Trauma like that lingers. It carves itself into your nervous system, teaches your body to be afraid even when your mind insists you're safe. The lesson she learned, and the one that sticks with anyone who hears her story, is simple but unforgettable. Safety isn't guaranteed. Sometimes danger is closer than you think. Sometimes it's right across the street staring back at you through the glass. And maybe tonight, when you're about to drift off to sleep, you'll think about that phone call. You'll imagine your own phone ringing in the dark, and for just a split second you'll wonder, what if someone's watching me right now? It was just after midnight when she woke up. At first, she didn't know what had pulled her from sleep, only that her heart was beating faster than it should have been. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears, and she was about to turn over and close her eyes when she heard it. A baby crying. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The thin, wavering wail cut through the night like a knife. She sat up, confused. She lived in a quiet neighborhood, mostly older couples, no families with infants on her street. The cry came again, closer this time, like it was just outside her window. Her first instinct was maternal, automatic. Someone needed help. Every nerve in her body leaned toward the door. She even swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold floor. But something inside her resisted. It was strange, wasn't it? A baby crying in the middle of the night right outside her window. The sound had a strange quality to it, almost too steady, like it repeated the same tones over and over again. That unsettled her, but compassion is a powerful thing. She stood, hand on the doorknob, ready to go outside. Then a memory surfaced. Just a week earlier, she had read an article online. It warned about criminals using recordings of a crying baby to lure people from their homes late at night. The article explained how our brains are wired to respond to that sound. The cry of an infant is one of the strongest triggers in human psychology. It bypasses logic and strikes at instinct, demanding that we care, that we protect. The article had said, "If you hear a baby crying outside your home in the middle of the night, don't go out. Call the police. It could be a trap." Her hand froze on the doorknob. The crying outside rose and fell again, tugging at her heart. Every cell in her body screamed that a child was in danger. But another voice, quieter but steadier, whispered that she needed to stay put. She locked the door again, double-checked her windows, and sat on the edge of her bed, heart pounding as she listened. The cries went on for another 10 minutes, then faded, disappearing into the night. Eventually, exhausted, she fell back asleep. In the morning, the scene outside chilled her blood. At the back door, hidden from the street, the police found deep scratch marks near the lock, as if someone had tried to pry their way inside. The dirt by the steps was disturbed, shoe prints visible in the soft ground. Someone had been there waiting. If she had stepped outside, she would have walked straight into their arms. The sound of the baby hadn't been real. It had been a weapon, a carefully chosen trick to override her rational brain and lure her into danger. Think about that for a moment. Imagine being alone in your house late at night and hearing the desperate cry of a child just beyond your door. Imagine how strong the pull would be to help, to open the door, to silence that awful wail. And now imagine realizing afterward that the very thing designed to awaken your compassion was being used against you. That is what predators do. They don't just prey on weakness, they prey on humanity itself. Her survival came down to one detail: memory. She had read something once, a passing article, and it lodged in her brain just long enough to echo when she needed it most. That tiny spark of knowledge created a pause, and that pause saved her life. Without it, she might have stepped outside barefoot, vulnerable, into the waiting hands of someone who wanted to harm her. This story stays with you because it exposes how fragile our instincts can be. We like to think our gut will protect us, but our gut is wired for compassion as much as it is for fear. A baby's cry bypasses skepticism. It doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like a command. That's why this tactic works. It hijacks empathy, turning one of our greatest strengths into our greatest vulnerability. Now picture yourself in her shoes. You're warm under the covers, half asleep when you hear it. A baby, alone, crying in the cold, dark night. You walk to the window, see nothing, but the sound keeps coming. Louder, closer. It scratches at your conscience, won't let you rest. Maybe you imagine the small bundle out there, maybe abandoned, maybe freezing. You hesitate, and that is when the danger has you. Because hesitation is all it takes to put you within reach. The next morning, as she stood at her back door, staring at those marks, she couldn't shake the thought. Someone had been right there, only feet away, while she had stood frozen in her hallway, torn between compassion and fear. They had waited. They had hoped she would choose to care. and in choosing, expose herself. What's the takeaway? Sometimes the kindest impulse can be twisted into a trap. The next time you hear something unusual in the night, crying, scratching, voices calling your name, pause. Don't act on the first instinct alone. Take a moment, think. Call someone, because predators know how we're wired and they will use it against us. This story is not meant to make you cold-hearted, but to make you alert. Compassion without caution can be deadly. The woman survived because she remembered that one crucial warning, and it gave her just enough space between impulse and action. That space saved her life, and maybe tonight when your house is quiet and the world outside is dark, you'll remember this too. If you ever hear that sound, thin and wavering, pulling at your heartstrings through the stillness of the night, stop, breathe, think. Because the difference between safety and tragedy might be nothing more than the decision you make in that single moment. She woke to the faintest draft brushing against her cheek. It was the kind of chill you only feel when a door or window has been left ajar, and for a moment, she thought it was just her imagination, the kind of strange sensation you get when you've been dreaming. The room was dim with early morning light, the kind that slips in before sunrise and leaves everything looking gray and uncertain. She pulled her blanket tighter and turned over, but the feeling gnawed at her. Something was off. When she finally got up, still groggy, she padded down the narrow hallway of her small college apartment. That's when she saw it. Her front door, wide open, not just cracked, open, as if someone had stepped in or stepped out. Cold air pooled in the entryway, making her shiver. She stood there in silence, staring at the door, trying to piece it together. Had she forgotten to lock it last night? Had the wind blown it open somehow? She checked her things. Her bag was still on the counter, her laptop still on the desk, wallet untouched. Nothing seemed missing. For a fleeting moment, she exhaled, convincing herself it was nothing. She shut the door, locked it, and tried to laugh at her own paranoia. The semester was stressful. Exams had her scattered. She told herself she'd probably just been careless, forgotten to pull the door shut all the way. That explanation was comforting enough to get her through breakfast. But all day, a shadow of unease clung to her. The image of that wide-open door lingered in her mind like a splinter. It didn't feel right. She told a friend later, brushing it off with a nervous laugh. "Can you imagine? My door just standing open all night. Thank God nothing was taken." Her friend shrugged and told her to get better locks, but they both moved on quickly, the way people do when they don't want to admit how vulnerable they really are. That night, she crawled into bed earlier than usual. She double-checked the locks, tugging on the door twice to be sure it was secure. She told herself she was being silly, that she was letting one small scare get under her skin. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the building made her jump. Every gust of wind outside her window sounded suspicious. But eventually, exhaustion pulled her under. The next morning, as she gathered her things for class, she reached for her phone. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she noticed the battery was lower than she'd expected. She hadn't used it much the day before. Frowning, she unlocked it and went to her photo gallery, hoping to clear some space. That's when her stomach dropped. Dozens of new photos, all from the night before. She scrolled slowly, her fingers trembling, each picture worse than the last. They were all of her. Her lying in bed. Her, curled on her side with her hair fanned out on the pillow. Her with the blanket pulled to her chin. Some were taken close up, so close that the grain of the fabric could be seen. The rise and fall of her chest captured mid-breath. Others were taken from farther away, from the corner of the room. Her sleeping form in the center, vulnerable, unaware. Her mouth went dry. She felt dizzy, like the room tilted beneath her feet. Someone had been inside, not just inside the apartment, inside her bedroom, standing over her while she slept, phone in hand, taking photo after photo. She could almost feel the weight of their gaze lingering on her skin, even now in the daylight. Panic set in. She dropped the phone, her heart hammering. Every detail of the previous night replayed in her mind. The door, the unease, that restless feeling she couldn't explain. She hadn't been paranoid. She hadn't been careless. She had been watched. She bolted out of the apartment and called the police from the safety of the campus cafe across the street. Her voice shook as she explained, her words tumbling out too fast. Officers arrived and combed through her apartment, but the intruder was long gone. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints they could lift. Just the photos. Digital proof of what had happened. Proof that someone had stood in her room, breathing the same air, watching her sleep with terrifying patience. The police told her it might have been someone who had a copy of her key, someone she knew, or maybe just a stranger who had slipped in while she was distracted. None of the possibilities brought comfort. In fact, each one made her feel worse. The thought that it could have been someone she knew made her skin crawl. The idea of a stranger with that kind of access was even worse. That night, she didn't return to the apartment. She couldn't. The thought of lying in that bed again, of closing her eyes in the same room where someone had stood silently, recording her vulnerability, was unbearable. She stayed with a friend, phone clutched tightly in her hands, scrolling through those photos again and again, as if searching for answers. Each time she hoped she'd misremembered, hoped she'd imagined it, but the images were undeniable. Her face in soft lamplight, her body under the covers, her unguarded sleeping self, catalogued by someone who had no right to be there. For weeks afterward, sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she pictured the camera lens just inches from her face. She imagined the sound of the door creaking open in the dark, the slow footsteps crossing the room, the weight of another presence beside her bed. She checked locks 3, 4, 5 times before lying down. Even then, she'd jolt awake at every sound, heart racing, convinced someone was watching her again. That is the thing about a story like this. It doesn't end when the photos are found. The fear lingers, rooted deep in the mind. Because the truth is, it could happen to anyone. How many of us lock our doors at night and drift off believing we're safe? How many of us sleep deeply, unaware of the world moving silently around us? The terror isn't just that someone was in her room once. The terror is knowing they could come back, that maybe they already had nights before without leaving a trace. And so the simplest of images, an open door, a phone on your nightstand, becomes charged with dread. You find yourself wondering, if you scrolled through your own gallery right now, what would you find? Would there be a photo you don't remember taking? Would you see yourself lying in bed unaware? That thought alone is enough to make you check your door one more time before you try to sleep tonight. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't about shadows in the hallway or voices in the dark. Sometimes it's about the silence, the things you don't hear, the things you don't see until it's too late. Sometimes the scariest thing of all is waking up to realize that while you thought you were safe in your dreams, someone was there, watching you dream, and leaving proof that they were closer than you ever imagined. It started with the smallest noises, the kind you'd normally dismiss if you lived in an old house. The man had owned his place for years, and the basement was always a little strange, drafty, cluttered, filled with the sounds of creaks and groans that came with the shifting of pipes and the settling of wood. But lately those sounds had changed. They weren't just random creaks anymore. They were patterned. Footsteps. At least that's what they sounded like. A slow, dragging step across the cement floor. A thud as though something heavy had been dropped or shifted. At first he told himself it was animals. Raccoons, maybe. Or rats. Houses attract all sorts of things, especially ones with old basements and forgotten crawl spaces. Still, the noises were unnerving. They always seemed to happen late at night, when the house above was quiet. Sometimes he'd be in bed, almost asleep when the sound would reach him through the floorboards. A muffled shuffling, the faint scrape of cardboard against concrete. He tried to ignore it. For weeks he told himself it was nothing, that he was just tired, that stress was playing tricks on his senses. But the noises continued. They grew bolder, less like the random scurrying of animals and more like the movements of someone with intent. He began to notice small things upstairs too. A box of cereal that seemed lighter than it should have been. a soda can missing from the fridge, his tools in the garage not where he thought he'd left them. One evening he was sitting in his living room reading when he heard it again. Not faint this time. Clear. Direct. A long, slow drag of footsteps echoing up from the basement. He froze, the book slipping from his hands. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the soft crunch of something being unwrapped. He realized, with dawning horror, that someone was eating down there. His first impulse was denial. Maybe something had fallen, maybe it was just pipes, maybe he was overreacting. But the pit in his stomach told him otherwise. Summoning his courage, he grabbed a flashlight and a heavy wrench from the garage and forced himself down the basement stairs. Each step creaked under his weight, the air growing colder as he descended. He shone the flashlight around the cluttered space. At first, nothing. Just the usual jumble of cardboard boxes, old furniture, and the faint smell of mildew. But then the beam of light caught something in the far corner. A blanket. Not folded, not stored, spread out on the ground. Next to it was a small, stained mattress flattened by use. Around it lay empty food wrappers, water bottles, and even a battered backpack spilling clothes and personal belongings. His stomach turned. It was impossible to deny now someone had been living in his basement. For how long? Weeks? Months? How many nights had he slept above them, unaware? He took a shaky step closer, and that's when he saw something that chilled him even more. The blanket was still warm. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. Whoever it was, they weren't just a ghost of the past. They were here. Maybe not in that moment, but recently. Maybe watching him even now, hidden deeper in the basement, waiting for him to leave. He bolted upstairs, slammed the door shut, and called the police with shaking hands. His voice cracked as he explained what he'd found, the words spilling out like a confession. When the officers arrived, they searched the basement thoroughly. They found more than he ever expected. Cans of food stashed behind boxes, a toothbrush and soap tucked into a corner near an old utility sink, and even a notebook with scribbled thoughts and drawings. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just someone passing through. This was someone who had moved in. Someone who had been living beneath his home, quietly, carefully, slipping upstairs when he was gone to take food and supplies, and returning to the shadows before he noticed. The police explained that cases like this weren't as rare as most people thought. Homeless individuals, drifters, sometimes even dangerous people, would sneak into basements, attics, or crawl spaces to live undetected. They called them froggers, people who secretly inhabit someone else's home without permission, blending in like a frog in a pond. It could go on for weeks, even months, before the homeowner realized. That night, after the police left, he sat alone in his living room, every creak of the house suddenly magnified. He couldn't stop picturing it, lying in his bed upstairs while a stranger stretched out beneath him, eating his food, using his things, listening to him walk across the floorboards. The violation was suffocating. His home, the place that had always been his sanctuary, felt tainted. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a threat. And then there was the question he couldn't shake. What if he hadn't gone down there? What if he had continued to ignore the noises, continued to explain away the missing food and misplaced tools? How long would it have gone on? What was this person's end game? Were they just looking for shelter, or had they been watching him, waiting for something more sinister? He changed the locks on every door, installed cameras, bought motion sensors, and even slept with a bat beside his bed. But security measures couldn't erase the memory of what he'd seen in that basement. The mattress, the wrappers, the warmth of the blanket. That image would stay with him forever. A reminder that the danger we fear outside our homes can sometimes be waiting inside, closer than we dare to imagine. And maybe that's what makes this story so terrifying. It isn't about the supernatural. It isn't about ghosts or monsters. It's about the possibility that while you live your life upstairs, someone else could be quietly living just beneath you, listening, waiting, existing in the spaces you never think to check. It's about the realization that the noises you dismiss, the small oddities you explain away, might not be harmless at all. So the next time you hear a sound in your basement, a shuffle, a thud, a faint rustle of boxes, think twice before brushing it off as pipes or animals. Think about the man who ignored those noises for weeks, only to discover that a stranger had been making a home beneath his feet. And ask yourself, if it happened to him, how sure are you that it couldn't happen to you? The road was empty, the kind of lonely stretch of highway that seems to swallow you whole. It was late, well past midnight, and the driver had been on the move for hours. The only light came from his headlights, cutting through the dark, and the occasional flicker of a road sign. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was steady, hypnotic, and he found himself glancing at the clock every few minutes, wishing for the comfort of home, or at least a town where he could stop for coffee. That's when he saw it. Up ahead, just beyond the curve, a car sat at an odd angle on the side of the road. Its hazard lights blinked weakly, like a dying heartbeat. Next to it, a figure waved frantically, arms slicing the night air in desperate arcs. The driver's stomach clenched. Something about the scene tugged at his instincts. He slowed down, foot easing off the gas, eyes narrowing as he tried to take in every detail. The figure was standing in front of the car, not beside it. That struck him as strange. Most people, when their car breaks down, hover near the driver's side door or the hood. Standing in front of the car put this person directly in the path of oncoming traffic. He thought about how dangerous that was. He thought about how odd it looked. The figure kept waving, more urgently now, as if to say, "Please stop, I need help." The driver's first impulse was compassion. He knew what it was like to be stranded, the feeling of helplessness when your car dies in the middle of nowhere. He imagined a woman alone, a man with a family waiting for him, maybe someone injured in an accident. His foot hovered over the brake, but as he got closer, the unease grew stronger. His gut whispered something his brain didn't want to hear. Don't stop. He flicked on his high beams, flooding the road ahead with harsh white light. For a split second he saw it, shapes shifting in the brush just beyond the shoulder, several of them. Low to the ground, crouched, waiting. His chest tightened, his heart hammering in his ears. He pressed his foot back onto the gas, firm this time, and the car surged forward. He didn't look back at the figure, didn't slow down, just pushed the accelerator and let the engine roar as he passed. The figure in the road lowered its arms as he went by. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met in the mirror. It wasn't the look of someone pleading for help. It was the look of someone who had been denied prey. Cold, calculating. He drove for miles before he finally allowed himself to breathe. His hands shook on the wheel, palms damp with sweat. Every instinct screamed that he had just escaped something. Still, a small voice in his head whispered doubt. What if it had been real? What if someone had genuinely needed help and he had left them behind in the dark? That guilt gnawed at him until he finally pulled into a gas station and called the police. When the officers arrived, he told them everything. The stranded car, the waving figure, the shapes in the bushes. They listened carefully, then nodded. He wasn't the first to report something like this. It was a known tactic. Criminals would stage accidents, using a decoy to flag down drivers. When someone pulled over, thinking they were helping, the others would spring from hiding. They'd take the car, the money, sometimes worse. The driver's decision not to stop, the instinct that told him to keep going, had likely saved his life. The police later confirmed that they found the same car abandoned by the roadside. No injured driver, no stranded traveler, just a prop in a trap waiting for the next good Samaritan to take the bait. The driver could not shake the thought of what might have happened if he had given in to his first impulse. He pictured himself pulling onto the shoulder, rolling down his window, leaning toward the figure to ask what was wrong. He pictured the shapes in the bushes rising, surrounding his car, the sudden rush of hands pulling at the doors. He imagined being dragged out, overwhelmed before he could react. That image haunted him for weeks. What made the experience so chilling was how ordinary it seemed at first. How many times had he seen a stranded car by the side of the road? How many times had he slowed down out of caution or kindness? It was the kind of situation you could stumble into any night, on any stretch of empty highway. That realization, that danger could hide behind something so familiar, was the part that kept him awake at night. The lesson burned itself into his mind. Gut feelings matter. They aren't random. They're the product of thousands of years of human survival, honed to detect subtle cues before we can even put them into words. His brain had noticed something, the way the figure stood, the movement in the bushes, even if he hadn't consciously registered it at first. That whisper in his gut had been his body's way of saying, "You're in danger." He thought back to every moment of hesitation on that road, the way his foot had hovered over the brake, the guilt that had pulled at him, how easy it would have been to give in, to silence that whisper in the name of being a good person, and how final the consequences would have been. Even now, years later, he remembers the look in the figure's eyes as he sped past. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't relief at seeing another human on the road. It was something else entirely. Something predatory. Something that still sends chills down his spine whenever he drives at night and sees a car pulled onto the shoulder. What he learned that night was simple, but powerful. Helping others is noble, but it should never come at the expense of your own safety. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if the scene doesn't add up, you're not being paranoid. You're being aware. The cost of ignoring that awareness can be far higher than a moment of guilt. So the next time you're driving down a dark road and you see a car stopped, a figure waving for help, ask yourself, do the details make sense? Or is there something just slightly off? Something that makes your skin crawl even if you can't explain why? That feeling could be the only thing standing between you and a trap. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember the story of the man who trusted his gut, pressed down on the gas and kept himself alive. Because sometimes survival isn't about being stronger or faster. Sometimes it's about listening to the quietest voice in the back of your mind, the one that whispers, "Keep driving. Don't stop. Not here, not tonight." The house had been on the market for months, maybe longer. It was the kind of place people walked through politely and then quickly ruled out. Too old, too drafty, too many little repairs needed. But when the young family stepped inside, they saw potential. The creaking floors and faded wallpaper didn't scare them. They felt character, history, something they could fix with time. It was big enough for the kids to grow into. The price was right. And despite the way the hallway seemed a little too narrow and the upstairs rooms a little too dim, they signed the papers and moved in. At first it was exciting. New paint, new furniture, laughter bouncing through empty rooms. They explored every corner of the house, opening closets, peering into cupboards, testing squeaky doors. But the attic was different. The entrance was a small hatch in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway, a square cut into plaster with a rope dangling down. It was awkward to reach, and for weeks they ignored it, too busy with unpacking and everyday life. One weekend, curiosity got the better of them. The father brought out a ladder, tugged down the hatch, and let the creaky wooden steps unfold. A wave of dust drifted into the air as he climbed. The attic was cramped, filled with insulation and cobwebs. The beam from his flashlight swept across the space, catching on boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, forgotten relics left behind by previous owners. Then he saw it. In the far corner, half hidden under a layer of dust, was a cardboard box. It wasn't large, but it was heavy when he pulled it closer. He assumed it was junk, maybe tools or newspapers. He carried it down carefully, setting it on the floor of the hallway where the kids crowded around eager to see. The box was unmarked, sealed only with brittle tape that peeled away easily under his fingers. When he opened it, the smell hit first. A faint, musty odor like paper that had been trapped for decades. Inside were stacks of Polaroid photos, hundreds of them, loose, jumbled, some curling at the edges. The children grabbed at the top ones, laughing at the idea of finding old family pictures. But the laughter died quickly. The first photo showed a woman asleep in bed. The angle was strange, as if someone had been standing in the doorway leaning in. The next was of a man, also sleeping, mouth slightly open, covers pulled to his chest. Another showed two children curled side by side, taken from above. None of them were posed. None of them looked like they knew a camera was present. The parents sifted through the stack quickly, confusion turning to dread. Every photo was the same. Different people, different bedrooms, all sleeping. The strangest part came when they began to recognize details. A lamp that looked exactly like the one in their son's new room. A curtain pattern that matched the ones in the master bedroom upstairs. Even the wallpaper, though faded now, was unmistakable. The realization sank in with the weight of stone. Many of the photos had been taken inside this very house, in their bedrooms. The family stared at one another, speechless, the box of photos between them like a living thing. They called the realtor, asking about the history of the house, but she didn't know much beyond a string of owners over the decades. Some had stayed briefly, some longer, but none had left behind anything like this. The police were contacted, of course. Officers came wearing gloves, flipping through the Polaroids with grim expressions. They promised to investigate, to compare faces with missing persons, to track the origins. But weeks later, no answers came. The photos were old, many yellowing with age, the faces unrecognizable, the film degraded. Whoever had taken them was still a mystery. Nights in the house became different after that. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old pipes felt loaded with meaning. The family found themselves checking closets twice, locking doors 3 times, listening to the silence as if it might betray someone still there. The children refused to sleep without nightlights, and the parents took turns staying awake longer than usual, as though guarding the rooms. The Polaroids had done something deeper than just frighten them. They had changed the house itself. What once felt like history now felt like intrusion. What once felt like character now felt like violation. The thought that someone had stood in those rooms, camera in hand, hovering over people as they slept, left a stain that couldn't be washed away with fresh paint or cheerful laughter. And the worst part was the questions that lingered. Who were the people in the photos? Were they previous owners? Tenants who once lived here and never knew they were being watched? Or were they strangers, brought here by someone else? And if so, what had happened to them after those photos were taken? The police never found records that matched. The box had no labels, no dates, no clues beyond the images themselves. Sometimes, late at night, the mother would sit awake, unable to stop herself from replaying the images in her mind. The woman asleep with her hair spilling across the pillow. The man with his arm draped across his chest. The children curled together so small and vulnerable. She imagined the photographer standing silently in the dark, camera raised, waiting for the right moment to click the shutter. She imagined the breath of that person in the quiet rooms, the floorboards groaning under their weight as they leaned closer. It wasn't just the past that unsettled them. It was the possibility of the present. What if the person had never truly left? What if they still had a key, still knew how to slip in unseen, still waited for nightfall to walk those same halls? Every sound became a reminder that they might not be alone. Eventually, the family sealed the crawlspace. They couldn't bear to look at it anymore, couldn't stomach the thought of that hatch opening into the place where the box had been hidden. They moved the kids into the same room, just for comfort, telling them it was an adventure, a sleepover every night. But the truth was clear on the parents' faces. The house was no longer theirs. It belonged to the silence, to the shadows, to the unseen hands that had held the camera decades before. People often say photographs capture a moment, that they freeze time. But these Polaroids did something worse. They froze fear. They captured innocence, vulnerability, and turned it into something that haunted anyone who looked at them. Each image was a reminder that privacy can be stolen without a sound, that the most sacred place, your bed, can be invaded while you're at your weakest. And so the box of Polaroids became more than evidence. It became a warning, a reminder that homes hold secrets, that walls remember, that sometimes the things you inherit when you move in aren't antique furniture or wallpaper or creaky floors. Sometimes it's something darker. Something left behind on purpose or maybe forgotten, but powerful enough to seep into every dream, every corner of the night. No one ever found out who took the photos. No one ever explained the faces or the rooms. And maybe that's what makes it worse, because if you don't know who, you can't know where they are now. You can't know if they ever really left. And every night, when the family closed their eyes, they couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the shadows, a camera was still waiting, ready to take the next picture. If you felt that chill tonight, don't keep it to yourself. Drop a comment with your scariest experience because I read every single one. And if you want more true horror that keeps you looking over your shoulder, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Remember, the scariest stories are the ones that are true. Sleep well if you can.